the time that you're too busy to get on your mat, or too busy to sit and be still, or too busy to go for that, mindful walk in the forest, is the time you probably need it the most.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Shafer, your host of Talks with Dr. Shafer. I'm a physician, mom, life coach, musician, author, publisher, and I am passionate about using storytelling as a tool to help you reclaim your story and build your most beautiful future. And today, I am so excited that we are joined by a fantastic, inspiring guest, Dr. Rachel Beanland. Dr. Beanland is someone who has done just that. She has reclaimed her story, and she is building a beautiful future, not only for herself, but for other people through so many amazing things she does. She's a public health doctor. She is a yoga and meditation teacher. She is the creator of the yoga and meditation practice, Resilience Yoga, and she herself hosts a beautiful podcast, authentictea. Dr. Rachel Beanland, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with you today.
Me too. And I've just been so excited. I was blessed to be able to be on your podcast and share my story on authentictea. And that was such a wonderful opportunity. And I've been so excited since then to have you come and share your story with us. So tell me about how you have gone on this journey from going into medicine and then having a bit of a pivot and exploring other avenues of your authentic self and how you wanted to show up and help the world through different venues.
Yeah, so it's a long story, I would say. But if I go back to that time where I decided I wanted to be a doctor, I was so young. I was 16, 17, 18 when I made that decision. And I really loved science. I really loved life cycles of plants and animals and humans. And I was so intrigued by pursuing that, learning more. And I also just loved learning. So it felt very natural for me to go into medicine. But what I would say is I really didn't know very much about what it was going to look like for me in 5, 10, 20 years' time. And so I embarked on this journey of, studying, and you know what that's like. You go to university, it's hard work. There's lots of practical elements. There's lots of theoretical elements. It was great fun to some extent. And I enjoyed when I first started working. I loved being on the wards. It was a real privilege to be a doctor and have that doctor-patient relationship. But I very quickly started to realize that actually what was driving me was something different than just being in that environment. I wanted to really look at people across all of the globe. I wanted to really change the way that people accessed healthcare. I wanted to think about some of those inequalities and inequities that we often hear about or see. And I had seen some of that as a medical student. I had gone to South Africa. And at that time in South Africa, there was a lot of HIV and tuberculosis, and there wasn't any access to treatments, the treatments that are now very freely, openly available to people. So I saw a lot of that injustice. And I think those experiences sort of planted a seed in my mind that I wanted to do something a little bit different. But I had no idea what. And as a lot of us do, you've studied for a long time, you graduate, you start working. It's great to be in that kind of cycle of earning your own money, being in that system. But I'd always felt a little bit out of place. I never really felt like I was being my true, authentic self. I knew that there was something a little bit not quite right for me, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And for a very long time, I stayed in that system, but it was a system that was very draining for me. And I think since then, I've done a lot of work on what my energetic body looks like, how I am with my energy. And I've subsequently realized that those environments will always be draining for me as an individual, because I'm someone that it gives a lot of energy to other people. I find it very difficult to then refill that energy and recharge. So when I was in that environment, as much as I loved it, I had some amazing colleagues. I learned so many wonderful skills. It was really an amazing career to a point, but it wasn't fulfilling for me because I wasn't really fulfilling my dream to make that bigger impact globally. And I also wasn't able to prioritize my own health or to think about my own life. So at that time, which was in my mid to late 20s, my entire life was absorbed by my career. I had very little time to think about my friends, my relationships, where my life was going, and what balance looked like for me. So there was a moment where I just knew it had to change. And that was really when I started to realize I needed to stop looking outward for someone to help me. And I had to start looking inward at creating some of those skills myself and finding my own inner compass to be able to guide me forward. So that was like the early part of my career. And that was very, I would say that was kind of the foundation for me to move on from them into that next stage of my story and kind of finding that path that felt more authentic to myself.
That's so beautiful, and I appreciate the way that you lay it all out. And I really believe that it will resonate with so many people who made decisions based on where they were at a certain place in their life. And then once the realities set in and the novelty wore off, they realized, I might have sought this for this reason, and it may have been a noble reason. It may have been right for me at the time, but now I'm living it and it's causing me to live out of alignment. And we feel that dissonance. Our body will tell us. And you describe that feeling of kind of pouring yourself out. And I'd love to hear how, once you recognize that and you started looking inward instead of pouring outward and finding new channels that you were passionate about, were you able to find something that even when you gave of yourself, there was more of a sensation of fullness rather than emptiness of I've lost something?
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, that whole process has really been about exploring the world of mindfulness and yoga because it was always something that I had been drawn to. It was always something that kind of intrigued me, but it was something I could never commit to. I mean, I had a hectic life. You can imagine a young, medical doctor working in a hospital, also that age where life is kind of chaotic. And I always saw yoga as something I wanted to do. I don't know why, but I was always drawn to it. And I had a moment when I was in probably the first 3 or 4 years of my career where I went to this yoga class. And I just remember it was in someone's tiny house. It was almost near darkness. There was a few incense, a few candles. And this whole hour of yoga was like I had been completely taken into a different world. And this experience stuck with me. It took me a long time to refine that. But as I realized I needed to go inward, I started to explore what that world could offer me, what that world of mindfulness and particularly the practice of yoga, what that could offer me. And it really has been the exploration of yoga, of mindfulness, of meditation that has allowed me to understand my energy much better and to also identify those places where I know my energy drains, what those activities are that kind of fill me back up, and how to find that balance. And I think so many of us are often seeking that balance. We want to feel thriving, we want to feel energetic. And sometimes it's hard when you're in those situations and it's so busy and hectic to actually just take that moment and kind of think, am I doing something that is uplifting me? And if I'm not, why am I doing this activity? And like questioning, like you said, really questioning kind of what is the intent behind this? And is it still the same intent? And is it okay for me to pivot, to think differently? So it was really those skills for me that have allowed me, and it's the same skills today that I'm always fine tuning to, I guess, like a little bit of your own barometer, if you like, of thinking, okay, today, what am I needing today? What is my energy like today? How can I feed that energy? And what do I have to give to other people? And how can I do that in a way that's going to uplift me rather than drain me?
That is so beautiful. And it is so important to have conversations about this, about self-development and self-improvement, self-introspection, using this dialogue that really provides a different perspective on it, that provides the perspective of when I focus on this And I stopped basically kind of, I hate to use the term, almost like bleeding out to the world, right? Like literally bloodletting. I'm letting go of my life force in some ways when I do things that aren't moving me in service to the person that I can be wholly authentic. When I do that, I'm losing pieces of myself. Whereas when I am really introspective, really authentic to who I am, my gifts, and I respect that. I don't abandon them. I don't abandon my values, right? I don't do things at work. Maybe my administrative team is saying, I need to do this, right? And it might cause a moral injury in me. It might mean that I lose a very important piece of myself, but I maintain my job. It's okay to say, take a step back. Can I injure myself in that way? Can I prioritize how that will affect me instead of only thinking about others, only thinking about this job? Because the job can replace me, but I can't replace me. And the world can't replace me. To the world, I'm the only me I'll ever be. And if I'm healthy and happy and fulfilled, I can be a better person for the world. But if I'm losing parts of myself because these external factors, be it a relationship that's not respecting your autonomy or a workplace that's, telling you to do things that really cause moral injury to you, because we know that happens. And it's something that doctors specifically experience a lot in work just because of the contrast between our goals as physicians and then the business of medicine, right? Which is, there are, conflicting feelings about whether that's even appropriate, that medicine is a business, because there is going to be that cognitive dissonance and that moral injury when you are approaching something that is a service to humanity, but you're also needing to work around the confines of business and billing and all of these other things. So I just think it's so important, and I'm so grateful that you have these conversations here as well as on your podcast about the experiences of female physicians in medicine and how they really have had to take a look at their lives, a look at their mindset, a look at, how is this world affecting me and what changes can I make within myself and how I'm structuring my life to live authentically and show up for the people I care about. I went into medicine to be a caring person and to be a helper. And if I'm not feeling like I can do that to my full capacity as a clinical part of this system, what else can I do that might even be more impactful, more meaningful?
Yeah, and I think something you mentioned there around female physicians, which I think is often contributes to this feeling, is that I can remember going to med school and we were really excited that 80% of our year were female, and it was this enormous pride of breaking that ceiling, if you like, that for once there was this enormous majority of female doctors. And that is only a great thing, right? We want to have that equality in the places that we study. We want to have that equality in our workplaces. It is amazing to have that richness and that diversity of people studying and becoming doctors. The challenge I feel, and I see this in so many of my clients that I work with, is that over time, our own priorities can shift and change. Over time, the world shifts and change. In the last 20 years, so many different things have happened. We live in a very different time than that time that I described of that, 18-year-old me being excited about science and going to university. And yet, I think so many of us get stuck because we don't allow ourselves that moment and that permission to reflect, to ask ourselves sometimes those difficult questions of, is this the right place for me? Is this the right, like you said, is it the right relationship for me? Is this the right place I want to live in for me? Is this the right workplace for me? Is this the right team for me? And to not only ask those questions, but also see your whole self as more than just that career.
Yes.
And as female physicians, we often fall into that. It becomes kind of a label for us. And particularly that clinical aspect, it becomes that something that we identify too much with sometimes. And we
Mm.
often do that at the detriment to other aspects in our lives. And I often see this, one of the things I love to do with my clients quite early on is to do a wellness wheel. And we look at all the different aspects of wellness together. And often there's a component of wellness that is completely missing from someone's life.
Mm.
And they often are unhappy about their career. So they put all their energy into trying to make it better at the
Mm.
detriment of something else. And that could be your own health. It could be the relationships around you. It could be the joy and the pleasure you have in other activities. It could even be the connection with the environment. So it's really giving ourselves that permission to kind of check in and say, hey, you know, we're 20 years on, we're 10 years on, we're 30 years on, whatever it is. What do I need right now? What is it that's going to make me excited to get up in the morning, to get out of bed? What is that real mission of my life? And what is my purpose? And am I living my purpose? And if it's different than it was, then it's okay. And that's what I say to a lot of people. It's okay. And I remember our conversation when you came on the podcast, and I loved one of the things you said about that editing, you know, continually
Mm.
editing your life, because we have to give ourselves that permission to do that. Otherwise, we get stuck in a box and we
Mm.
get stuck there for too long.
Exactly. Well, and what do? We grow. We're human beings. And I'm picturing, little Rachel before she became Dr. Rachel. And, imagine, I don't know if and not everyone who's listening right now will be a parent, but everyone has experienced from afar or from up close a child developing, right? Even if it's just your own life. So think about yourself and how, as a child, hopefully you were celebrated for the first time you spoke, the first time you walked, the first time you went to a t-ball game, right? The first time you did a tumble in gymnastics, the first time you played a solo on the stage, your guitar lessons, whatever it was, every time you developed a new skill, a new hobby, you were celebrated. And when that one didn't work anymore, but the skills you learned from practicing guitar taught you, hey, if I practice, if I invest in myself, I can grow, I can be brave, I can get up on stage. And that led to maybe public speaking, an internship, working at a company that maybe you wouldn't have had the gumption to do if you hadn't had that experience. Everything you're doing as a young person is teaching you. Every failure is really just growth. It's an opportunity to exercise parts of your brain so that you are becoming better and stronger and more resilient and will be a successful adult. But the thing is, I think often once we launch into a career, we decide our major, we decide our career, we decide what company we're going to work for. We start to have 401ks and reasons to stay at these companies. We start to have homes that we have mortgages for. We, become a part of the community, and we start to feel so stuck potentially. And when you really look at that, you can either see it from the lens and perspective of, I think sometimes we feel, oh, I'm disloyal if I pivot. I am unfocused. Everyone sees me as this person. How can I become this other person, right? I've put so much into this. But if we just stop for a moment and remember how we got there, it was from constantly learning, constantly growing, constantly pivoting. And we can't put ourselves in a new pot and say, okay, now I'm done. Now I'm just going to stay in this pot. That doesn't work. And you're going to have so many growing pains, and that pot's going to burst if you don't allow yourself to organically continue to grow and repot, rehome, right? You're not going to be able to stay in the same place forever. And it's not only okay, it is to be celebrated. And if we're not growing and making new choices, I think that deserves our attention as well.
Completely. Because the way I see life, and I think I've always seen life, is it's an adventure. It's like if you stop feeling that sense of adventure, you don't have that sense of curiosity. You don't have that sense of what can I do? What could this be like? And if you shut all of that down, then you have to, I think, question if you're really truly living to you. And maybe you are, but it's like, what is that? What it could be there for you? And having that sense of adventure allows you, I think, to take those steps. And it's not always easy. Like, I do want to say that, it is challenging to pivot your career. It is challenging to change your life. It is very difficult sometimes to take those steps. But what can help you is really being motivated by that why. And I think when that why comes from within, of like, I'm not okay in the situation I'm in, there's a very good motivation to make it change. So that helps you. And I can see that with a lot of people, is that can be the real guiding light to making change, is acknowledging this is not working for me for
Yes.
whatever reason. And that was very much like that for me. It was just a moment of like, I don't think even if I stay trying to do this, it's going to get any better. It's only going to get worse. It's only going to become more challenging for me, that something has to change. There was that sort of pivotal moment to think, okay, what can it be? And that's where I love so much yoga, because all of the philosophy of yoga is really about being that lifelong learner. It's like that is part of it, that you are always on a journey. You're never at the end. None of us are ever the finished product. And I think that really helps me as an individual to take that on board, that every day is a day for adventure and exploration and curiosity.
I love that. And ask yourself, so if you're feeling misalignment, if you're feeling it's not right, instead of focusing on that feeling, right? Because you can get stuck in that feeling of this isn't right, and kind of telling that story over and over again. How can I tell this story? How can I learn more about this story so I can tell it differently, so that it can go somewhere else? And that's what you were talking about, kind of diving into it and saying, well, why? Why do I feel this way? What is this feeling coming from? Rather than shaming ourselves for feeling dissatisfaction or misalignment, why do I feel this way? And what would I like to do about it? Because today, as you said, some people may be a bit stuck, and right now that's okay. They're not ready to make a change, but if they're even open to asking questions, that may open up in the future when they are in a stage of readiness to make those changes. And so I love that there are avenues to explore that, such as yoga, you know, podcasts about health and wellness and self-introspection, because we may need to really prime our brains to these new concepts, that it is okay to grow. It is okay to not only be seeking external validation and external reward, the MD degree, the accolades at work, the home, whatever it is that you've been chasing to try to have that fulfillment. If you come to a point where you recognize that for you that's not doing it, it's okay to look inward, and then you'll really find what you were seeking.
Yeah. And I believe that it allows us, if we can do that inner work, the more you're able to connect to yourself, then the more you're able to kind of build up that clarity of what it is that you might be looking for, and then that confidence to like take those next steps. So it's really, without that connection, and it's an ongoing practice, I think that's really, I think that's a big mindset shift in a way, because we do live in a world which is quite linear. It's very much you're moving from A to B, and you keep adding little steps and steps and steps. But I think this sense of looking inward and kind of that continual practice, and realizing that it's not necessarily a linear pathway, that there may be these curves, there may be these cycles that you're going to go through. And like you say, you might be at a point in the cycle where you're not quite ready to move, but you're feeling something's misaligned, or maybe you're starting something new and you want to feel into that. But the more that you can acknowledge what is going on for you and tap into that sort of conscious awareness, I think that is only a really healthy skill to have in whatever work you do, whatever your life looks like, whatever your passions are and your dreams are. The more you're able to tap into yourself, the better you are going to be able to have those moments of true joy, have those moments of true connection, and feel really fulfilled.
And that's what we're all looking for. Now, from your perspective, working with clients who do have a similar interest in yoga, or they want to explore that with you and make it a part of their self-awareness journey, How do you make that work on a day-to-day basis? What does that look like when someone comes to you and wants to go on that journey with you?
So, a big part of what I share with people is that re energizing. So, often people come to me, they feel very stuck. They are often not prioritizing their needs. And a big part of that is finding that energy again. And so, with these practices of thinking about the broader concept of yoga, so I like to call it kind of living yoga rather than what we might typically think of in terms of yoga. So, often a lot of people, it's very easy to think of yoga just as that posture, going to a class and moving. And yes, that is an important part of yoga. But I like to see yoga as really the living aspect of it, applying the practices and the philosophy of yoga to your everyday life. So, what does that look like for people? It's really about being really mindful about your energy, being really mindful about those things that you're doing in the day so that you can be really present. So it's coming into that present moment. And that may be doing some of these activities like actually doing some yoga on a mat, doing some movement practice, doing some meditation. But more often than not, it's actually taking in some of that mindset shift, taking in some of those tools to really approach your day differently, to approach your day with a much more positive lens, to remind yourself of why you're doing things, to get really clear on that lifelong purpose, that lifelong intention, and then to use that positivity to allow you to take all of those small steps going forward. So it looks very different for everyone I work with. And most people I work with, which is why I love working with them and probably why they come to me, are very interested in building up more of an energetic practice in some form or other. So it may be yoga. They may have dipped into yoga. They may have dipped into meditation, maybe breath work, or they might be interested in some other modalities like Reiki or hypnosis. But they're generally very open to that energetic side and they want to really embody that approach as they change their life. So I always like to think that instead of just taking that next job, what I help people to do is to actually make a sustainable change in their life so that they are looking at all aspects of their life and really embodying that change.
I love it. And I love that wheel of life and saying, okay, the job's bothering us. Is it the job? Or is it some other basically hole, right? That we're not meeting this need. So it's this hole, it's this need that's unfulfilled. And because maybe we feel actually quite confident in our skills as a worker, as a, someone who is helping society in that way, we actually are more comfortable focusing on this. And we're not going to look at this unless someone who's trained to help us see those voids, see those areas that we really could do better for ourselves if we focus our attention there, helping you retrain your eye, right? And I think it's really important to say for people who may be skeptical about yoga, maybe they've never done yoga before, or they're skeptical about hypnotherapy. I've had a hypnotherapist on the show as well. And the commonality of these practices is they're a combination of mindset work as well as bringing you back to your body. And you really can't do mindset work that's meaningful and connecting to yourself and grounded if you don't bring it back to your body. And that's going to look differently for everyone based on how they can move their body, how they wish to move their body. Do they want to be in a yoga class with a group? Does that make them feel safe and open? Or would they rather be alone practicing hypnotherapy or alone practicing yoga or alone practicing just certain exercises that make them feel good? For me, I love doing a core exercise every day. That's like my yoga. That's my time where my mind and my body become one. And I am so happy with the self-care that I do. It makes me feel stronger. And that's my me time that's very precious for me and brings me back into my body. But I love this idea. And I wanted to discuss for people who are maybe a little shy or skeptical about the idea of practicing yoga, or maybe even just not feeling that they're willing to commit to that time for themselves because they're too busy. Right. And well, no, my brain's too busy to go there and take that time off. But, perhaps your brain is too busy not to, because you need to reboot and you need to come back to your body. Otherwise, at some point, that system is going to have a system failure because it's not rebooting. It's not getting that downtime. It's not getting to upgrade its software. We need to do things for our mind and body to keep doing the things that we love to do.
And one of the things I always think is that the time that you're too busy to get on your mat, or too busy to sit and be still, or too busy to go for that, mindful walk in the forest, is the time you probably need it the most. And I often have to remind myself of that. So as I said, we're all lifelong learners. I don't always get it right. Like, I love practicing on a daily basis, but sometimes I find it really hard. And I have to remind myself, these days that you're finding it really hard is the day you really need to try and do it. And these practices are really about trying to move into being instead of doing, because we often fill our lives with to-do lists, we fill our lives with accomplishments, we fill our heads with ideas and thoughts, we replay things from the past, we think about things from the future. All of these practices, and like you say, connecting to your body, is really just about moving into that sense of just being, just simply being in the body that you are in on this earth. And if you can do that just for a small moment of your day, it can have quite a powerful impact. So I can totally understand that when people see, and there's a lot of different types of yoga on the internet, there's lots of different kind of ideas of what that looks like. It can be quite intimidating. Even times I have done yoga practice for years, and sometimes if I go to a class and it's not kind of my class, it can feel intimidating. So I can understand that it can often be a little bit nerve-wracking. But actually, if you strip it all back and you think about the real principles of these practices, it's about that sense of connection to yourself, and really stepping into that being and bringing that into your everyday life in whatever form you can find for yourself. And I think that looks so different for a lot of people. But the beauty of the internet and the world we're in is that it's so easy to dip in and try things. So I think that is something that I would encourage anyone to do, is if you see something and you think, oh, that sounds interesting, or maybe you listen to a podcast and you hear something, allow that intrigue, follow that intrigue, because you may find another practice, and then you might find another practice, and then you'll find something, and you might find something that just works for you, that can be your everyday practice, that on those hard days will give you that sense of grounding and stability. And on those days where things feel easier, it's the practice which you can just sit and enjoy, or you can be in and enjoy. And it's really, I love to always think of it as like you're adding to your toolkit of things that can help you through adversity, things that can help you through challenges. It's not that these practices are going to eliminate all difficulty in your life. That is not what we can do. But it allows you to keep going when things are challenging and tough, and to move through that, and to have those tools to get to the other side.
Absolutely. And taking the time when life is going okay or going really well to master tools, so that in a time of crisis or in a time of mild dysregulation, when you are challenged, that you have that tool at the ready, you know how to use it, right? You don't want the first time you to use the tool to be when you're in crisis, because it likely won't be as effective, because your body and your mind can't focus on it in the same way. But if it's a true habit of yours and it's a true tool for you, then you'll be ready to use it in a time where you're really, really challenged and you need something to fall back on. You don't have to have the answers, but you have a tool to use to help you get through that moment, because it will pass. We just sometimes need a vehicle to get us past it.
And in my own experience, one of the ways that I've seen this play out in my own life is in a very physical way. So 3 years ago, I had an accident, which was a bizarre accident. After a yoga class, I had borrowed someone's electric bike to get there, but I took quite a horrible fall. And I broke both my wrists and one of the vertebrae in my back. And it was very, very interesting to me that the first thing I did when I had an enormous amount of pain was to connect to my breath and to use the breathing exercises that I've learned and that I share with people to help myself in that moment, to find some connection and stability, to deal with an enormous amount of pain, of physical pain. But then also in my recovery, it was an amazing privilege in a way that I had all these tools I could dip into, because it allowed me to have a very positive experience of my recovery. And I realized this doesn't happen for everyone. So I'm not saying this is necessarily the magic pill, but for me, it was very, very useful to have those tools to support me both physically and emotionally, to be able to deal with uncertainty, I think, which is often can happen in a situation, whether it's a physical injury, whether it's an emotional state that you're in, or whether it's something that's happened in your life. There's a huge amount of uncertainty. And I think these tools can be really powerful at helping you to deal with that uncertainty, to deal with just today, just to think about, okay, today, what am I going to do? What do I need today? Back to those questions about your energy. How can I connect to myself? How can I nurture myself? How can I nourish myself so that tomorrow I'm going to be there again and I'm going to do the same? I'm going to check in. I'm going to see what I need. I'm going to keep nourishing myself. And to me, having those tools made a huge difference to how I was able to approach that event in my life.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm so grateful that you had those tools at the ready. And oh, it's so beautiful, because that's why we do this, right? That's why we communicate these tools to people. That's why we became physicians, because we want to help people. We don't necessarily want to just fix the problem. We want to help people have tools to help them cope with the problems when they come up, right? Preventive medicine, preventive yoga. I like this concept of, this is not just an investment in making you feel better today. This is an investment in helping you cope with future challenges. And I really want to highlight something that I'm sure we see in practices like yoga and in exercise, as well as in medicine. So if someone comes to us and they have headaches, let's say, and we prescribe a medicine for their headaches, and we say what the potential side effects could be, what the benefits are, how to take it, explain that, the side effects will likely be prominent at the beginning, but will wear off over time if they're going to experience them at all. But let us know how it's going. And they come in the next week and they say, "Doctor, I took that medicine one time. It made me feel really, goofy in my head, silly, and I hated it. And I'm not going to take any more medicine for headaches, because as bad as my headaches are, this is scary. I don't want to deal with it," right? When the reality is, we could say, "Okay, you know what? You have a greater response." I don't like to use the word sensitivity, because I find that a very disconnecting word when we're communicating with people, but you have a greater response to this medication. Maybe your metabolism is a certain way so that you have a bigger response, or you just are very in touch with your body. So you feel that cognitive change, that cognitive side effect very strongly. So how about we half the medicine? We half the dose, and we take it at half a dose for a week. And if we have a really open relationship with our patients, we can hopefully get them there so that they can benefit from the medicine, if in fact that's something that would help them, right? Although, often there are many other things that we should be working with our patients as well on, not just medications, but to focus on the fact that when you start something, it's a bigger challenge, right? When you start a new workout routine, it's going to hurt. You haven't used those muscles in that way before. When you start a new mindset practice, it's going to hurt. You're facing things that you maybe have not allowed yourself or protected yourself from thinking about and facing in the way that you think, in the way you talk to yourself, for example. So all of these are just examples to say, when you start a new practice and it's uncomfortable and it's challenging, try not to basically retreat from this practice. If it's something you really want to try to give yourself this toolkit, lean into it. Allow yourself to have some growing pains, because that's the only way it will become a habit and a tool for you to have in the future.
The thing I love about that is that whole kind of adding on, just starting small. Like you gave that example of the pill. Is the same when we give medication. It's the same when you think about taking a practice on. And I always find this with practices like meditation, particularly, is that it can be really tempting to think, okay, I found this amazing YouTube video. I'm going to do this for an hour every day. I'm going to commit to this. By next Sunday, I'm going to feel fantastic. But life is often not that easy to do that. Sometimes we can create those spaces for ourselves, and that's fantastic. But in reality, most people have busy lives. Most people find it difficult to add in new habits along the way. And so I always think it's really helpful to find the very smallest steps that you can take and then start to add back on again. And also to realize that you might add back on and you might get to a stage where you're practicing and something may happen and you might have to drop back down to that earliest point again, and finding that simplistic thing that you can do. And I love one of the things I did when I was trying to add in a lot of practices for myself is I read some of BJ Fogg's material. I don't know whether you're familiar with him, but he's got a lot of ways of adding in tiny habits. So it's all about trying to add in a habit on top of something that you already do habitually. And so one of the things that I've done for many years after reading some of his work is that as I wake up in the morning, when I put my feet on the ground, in my mind, I say to myself, it's going to be a great day today. And that's the thing, is you're always going to put your feet on the ground. So if you attach that movement and that action with another action that is helping you either with your mindset, it could be an affirmation, it might be something you want to tell yourself, it becomes a very part of your second nature because you've made it easy. So I always think with these practices like meditation, like yoga, like walking, like adding in some exercise, maybe just sitting journaling, being able to voice your opinions more, whatever it is, try to find the things in your day where you can just add on a little bit of extra activity, because it would naturally become much easier for you to do it. It's like most of us clean our teeth regularly. So there's a moment where you might do that, or you wash your face, or you have your breakfast. So think about those things that you do on a daily basis where you can maybe just add in 5 minutes of time for yourself. And that might just be 5 minutes of sitting with your coffee in the garden, or 5 minutes just, pausing before you start your next chore in the house or go to work or commute or whatever, just to take that moment for yourself and then add in and explore and try and be curious. And for me, that is something that I really think can really help us, rather than thinking about, it's easy, isn't it? I think in the social media world as well. And you see protocols and you hear these amazing lives that people have. And sometimes it can be really overwhelming to think, wow, I mean, how do these people find the time to live these enriching lives where they can do 10 different, nourishing activities every morning? Start really small. I think that has to be the easiest, like this, down to the smallest factor that you can find in your life. And then you'll start to build it up and you'll feel great about it because you're empowering yourself rather than setting yourself a goal that is not achievable and then constantly feeling bad or berating yourself that you haven't done it.
I love that. And honestly, nothing can be truer than the body in motion stays in motion, right? To start your day, you have to get out of bed, put your feet on the ground. And that's a beautiful moment to decide what the day is going to be like. Because, one could say, well, you don't know what's going to happen to you that day. That's absolutely true. You don't have control over that, but you have control over your thoughts, how you respond to things that happen, and how you show up. And I love this practice of putting your feet on the ground and saying, it's going to be a great day. It's going to be a great day. I'm going to show up and I'm going to be, the best me that I can, no matter what the world sends my way. And I have to say, it's one of the most charming things that my husband does every morning. He gets up and he walks to the window and that's what he says. It's a beautiful day. And he means it with every fiber of his being. And he looks outside. It could be raining, snowing, blustering, beautiful, sunny, birds singing. It does not matter. He just smiles and says, "Oh, what a beautiful day." And I love it because I do think, and he's a very, very positive person. It's very difficult to get him to respond to a situation without positivity. And almost, sometimes when you're kind of like, "Oh no, I want you to just hold space for me. I'm frustrated. Be frustrated with me." It's not his set point. And nor is it mine. But, we all have those moments where we're kind of like, "Oof, this is where I'm at." And it's okay sometimes to say, "Okay, this is where I'm at." But then, like we said before, okay, what tools? I don't want to stay here. I acknowledge I'm here. I don't want to stay here. What can I do to get out of this place? And so I just love these little habits through yoga and through mindset work that you share with people, through the work you do at Resilience Yoga, as well as the work you do through your podcast, to just introduce people to these thoughts and these practices so that they do have these tools, these new things to consider, these new ways of thinking, so that they can perhaps start the day with a positive thought, get that ball in motion, right? Because we know the body emotion stays in motion. So if we are focusing positively with our energy, we are more likely to stay that way than if we're focusing negatively. So let's give ourselves the tools to try to stay in that energetic direction, because our lives will be the better for it.
I couldn't agree more. I love that. I just think that the more we can bring positivity in an early point in our day, the more we're going to be able to continue in that vibe, because we know, and there's lots of research on this, that the more you see positive words, the more you think positive words, the more you're able to embody that sense and that feeling. And actually, if we do the opposite, where we only see negative words and we allow ourselves to kind of go into those negative feelings, you can kind of get stuck in them, and you can get stuck in that circle of negativity. And something you said earlier on in the conversation is that sometimes when we're in a difficult situation, it can be really easy to focus on what's going wrong. And that is also bringing us into that negativity all the time. So anything that we can do that shifts us just into that positivity really uplifts our mood. It can make us feel more empowered. It gives us that confidence to move forward in our day. And it can be so simple as your thoughts and your words, and then the actions you do. So when I was listening to you then, it just reminded me that this morning I did a meditation which had a mantra in, which was around being in control of your thoughts and your mind and your actions and your words. And that is really all we can control, like you said. So I'm a really big fan of using any kind of positive affirmation to just remind yourself to move away from the negative and just into that positive. So it can be something that you tell yourself when you wake up. It can be something even sometimes as you go to bed, to find, just something that's been positive in your day. And practicing gratitude also comes into that, finding those things that you can feel grateful for. But I think the more that you can focus on that affirming words of positivity, I think it can only be a beneficial thing for you, even if it's that only moment in your day where you get to feel great and positive. It sets that vibe.
It absolutely does. And I love the tools that you've discussed today. So with the yoga, the actual physical practices, you mentioned mantra just now, breath work. And also I think routine is built into all of that, right? Showing up for yourself, picking a schedule that works for you and showing up for yourself and making sure you're prioritizing that. Are there any other parts to yoga that you want to highlight, or to meditation you want to highlight for people so that they better understand how they can use this as a tool for themselves?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I could talk about yoga and meditation a lot, but what I think is that it really is about finding simple habits that you can adopt that are going to give you what you need. So that first thing might be just identifying what it is you're seeking from these practices, because all of these things bring in different aspects. For me, thinking about your body in layers, which is what we do in yoga. So like your physical layer is really your external layer. So that can be something where you're doing something for movement. And then as you move down, you go into your energetic layer. So that's really where you're able to connect to things like your breath. And then you're moving further down. And that's where you're really thinking about coming into that state of being, simply being. And that's where the meditation comes in. So these different layers may be different for different people. In terms of the other types of habits, if you like, and other types of practices that I would love to share with people, I think in terms of exploring these things is that I don't think that there is one way or like a set prescription. So I think it is really good to find spaces where you can explore. And for me, the Insight Timer app is a great app for that. So I've used this Insight Timer app for the last 10 years. It's a fairly new app on the market, but it's really built with a community sense. And the amazing thing in there is that there are loads of talks, there are podcasts, there are movement practices like yoga, tai chi, yoga nidra. There are also meditations, breath work, but it's a space. It's a space where everyone is welcome. And it's a space where at any time in the world, when I turn it on in the morning, sometimes there are hundreds of thousands of people in the app at the same time. So it's also a great space if you want to feel like you can belong to something, you can be part of a community. So I think finding these spaces is part of the habits for me, is finding these spaces, whether that's a physical space like a yoga class where you can actually be with people, or it's an online space like an app. But I think part of the practice is finding the space that allows you to explore and to learn safely, but also with that sense of openness and adventure, so that you can find them. Because if you can find the spaces, it will make it a lot easier on the journey, because there's a prompt there. You know, we all know if we have an invitation from a friend to go for lunch, we're much more likely to go for lunch than if we just said to ourselves, well, I'm going to take myself to that restaurant today to go and have some lunch. I'm going to go to that cafe around the corner because I love the view. It's the same with these practices, is finding some of these communities where people feel the same way as you can resonate with their stories, you can learn things collectively. I think that is a really important part of adding in all these different practices and finding the ones that really suit you the best.
And I love that. And I love the focus on community. And I love the action there of choosing your community, choosing the spaces that resonate with you. That's okay. You don't have to try to fit into a community. You can seek the community within which you belong. And that can be different communities to meet all of the different facets of who you are as an individual. And yoga can be a part of that, and meditation can be a part of that. So it's so beautiful. Dr. Beanland, tell us how people can find out more about you, and if they are interested in coaching or your teachings on meditation and yoga, how can they pursue that? How can they reach you?
Yeah, so my website is resilienceyoga.fr. I'm in France. So there all the information on the website about how to connect with me. If anyone is interested in exploring some guided meditations and some online practices, then you can also go to the Insight Timer app, and you can find me at Dr. Rachel Beanland. And then I'm also on Instagram at Dr. Rachel Beanland. So you can also connect to me there and come and listen to the podcast. So the podcast is called authentictea. Dr. Shafer was an amazing guest on the podcast. And it really is a space, very much like we've said, about that community. It's about finding that community. For us on the podcast, it's about a community of women who have been trained as doctors and have found different ways and paths through their lives. So it's a space that we can connect as a community. So I would invite anyone who is interested to also come and listen to the podcast too.
And I highly recommend all of I won't recommend my episode, not because I don't want to, but because I'm just, not going to toot my own horn. But I recommend all the other episodes too, because, oh, they're so beautiful. And, when we pivot, that can feel precarious. That can feel uncomfortable and dangerous and all sorts of things. We just can have so much shame around pivoting. And you creating this safe space is so beautiful. And when you hear other people's stories that are similar to yours, but different also, but connecting because you're just seeing that they're allowed. You have permission to be yourself. You have permission to make those choices. That is so healing to find that community. So thank you so much for the work you do and creating that space. It's so beautiful, so meaningful. And I want to ask you, I have your permission to steal a line from your show, that who would you like to sit with to have your most authentic cup of tea?
So I love that you've asked me this. This is the question I ask everyone on my podcast, and it is always amazing to hear their answers. For me, it goes back to that sense of community. So I would say that I would love to have a cup of tea with some of my dear yogi sisters who I trained with when I did my yoga teacher training, because years ago, when I was struggling in my career pivot, I did some coaching, which was really, really helpful for me. And one of the things we did was visualize. And she asked me to visualize myself at work. And all I could see was a circle of people. And as I described that, I just couldn't understand how this was ever going to fit into medicine for me. If I then fast forwarded quite a few years later, I found myself pursuing more of my yoga teacher training. And suddenly I was in a circle. I was literally sitting in a circle with some of the dearest women who were so accepting of each other, so there to enjoy the joy and the adventure together. And they have remained such dear souls to me since. So that for me was a very special moment where I found that inner person again and was able to be really 100% authentic. And so whenever I have the opportunity to reconnect with them, that is what I love to do. And that would be my most authentic cup of tea.
I love that. And I hope they get to hear this episode today too and feel that big, warm virtual hug you just sent them.
Yeah, hopefully they are. They are great fans. And I think that is the wonderful thing. When you find your community, they are the people that champion you. And I'm sure you've also found this on your own journey, is when you can find those people, they will always be proud of what you're doing. They will always be excited. They will share all those ups and downs, but they are the people that are going to carry you through. So I really encourage anyone who's thinking about pivoting or trying something different is try and find those people who are already doing something that you want to do, or maybe trying something that you want to do, because they are the people who are going to love your ideas and your passions. And they're going to be your biggest champions and friends going forward.
That's beautiful advice, because you know what? We already have our best built-in critic that lives within ourselves. We need to surround ourselves with people who are going to cheerlead our best efforts and our dreams, to give us that boost to really lean into our futures and the things that we want to do to make this world better. And you are doing that. I'm so grateful that you are here to have this discussion with me today. And I know it enriched the lives of listeners. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and for holding this beautiful space today.
Our pleasure. And listeners, thank you so much for being here too. Dr. Beanland was gracious enough to be here today and share her wisdom with us. And I would love it if you subscribe to her show, because it is truly amazing. And I think, especially if you are interested in medicine and the experience of female physicians in medicine and their pivots, it is just such a meaningful way to spend your time and to learn. So subscribe to that. Head over to her website if you're interested in having coaching and teaching from her. She is a lovely human being and resource. Thank you so much for being here. Take care, stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.